Morning, everyone.
Teresa and Julia, are we live streaming now? Are we ready to start?
Okay, the meeting is now prepared for live streaming. Councillor Borrett, we're over to you.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the Governance and Audit Committee at Breckland Council. This is a meeting in public today, Thursday, the 8th of October at 10 o'clock. Welcome, everybody. I think in view of the fact that we all fit on the screen, I don't think we'll use the chat function. So if you'd like to attract my attention, please wave your arm in the screen and I will make a note to ask you to speak. I think if we could just go through first the members of the committee that we have here. So we have the Vice Chairman, Councillor Kybird. Could you indicate, please, Councillor Kybird, so that those seeing right, thank you. We have Councillor Clark. Councillor Clark, thank you. Myself, Bill Borrett, who is the Chairman. And we have Mr. John Plaskett, who is the lay advisor. John, would you? Thank you. We also have other members of the committee and officers, all of whom are very welcome. So I think, as we can see everybody on the screen, welcome Councillor Turner, Councillor Burt, Councillor Dale, Councillor Suggett, who is the Cabinet member for one of the items coming up, and Councillor Hewitt and Councillor Cowan, both of whom are Cabinet members. You're all very welcome. We also have a number of officers. If I'm going across my screen, we have Alison Chabot from Breckland Council, Mark Stimson from Breckland Council. We have Mark Hodgson from Ernst & Young, and we have Fiona. Could you just remind me of the name of the firm, please? Fiona Dodney. You're on mute.
There we go. Sorry about that, I was on mute. Yeah, it's from TIA, Internal Audit. So I'll be presenting on behalf of Faye Hayward. Lovely, thank you very much.
Okay, right. Well, I think in that case, we can move on to item 1 of the agenda, which is minutes of the meeting on the 17th of March, 2020, which was, I think, a meeting in person, the last meeting of the council before lockdown. It seems a little long time ago. If I could take you to page 4 of your agendas, I'm going to go through them a page at a time, and this is for accuracy only. So page 4, any comments, members? Page 5, page 6, page 7, and page 8. Any comments? No? Could I have a proposer that we accept those as a true and accurate record? Thank you, Councillor Kybird. Everybody agreed? Nobody against? Anybody against? Okay, thank you. That is duly confirmed. 2 actions arising from the minutes, if any. I don't have any down that aren't covered elsewhere on the agenda. Are there any comments? Sorry, John Plaskett.
Thank you. On page, well, the last page, section 2620, we talk about the risk strategy. I raised the point that risk wasn't included in the March meeting. I also note it's not included on this meeting. I also look at the agenda, future agenda, and there's no mention of strategic risks on there. I think as a governance committee, it's a bit remiss of us not to be looking at risk. We haven't looked at it since January. We're supposed to look at it quarterly, I believe.
I do agree with that, John. And looking at your minute here, it should be on the work programme. Obviously, the June meeting hasn't happened, and we've got a big agenda here. I would say we're due to meet in December. I think we would definitely, Julie, like an officer and the risk us to discuss that at the next meeting, come what may. Okay?
That's fine, Chair.
And if it's not there to be discussed, I'd like an officer to come to the meeting and explain why it's not.
That's noted.
Thank you. John, are you happy with that? Thank you. Okay. Item 3, apologies for absence. Julie.
Chairman, I have one apology for absence, and that's from Councillor Jane James.
Lovely, thank you. Any others from any? No. Okay, we move to item 4, urgent business. I have none. 5, declarations of interest. Does any member of the committee have an interest which they haven't already disclosed that would affect any item of discussion today? No? Lovely, thank you. And we have a number of non-members, councillors, who are very welcome today. They are Councillor Turner, Councillor Dale, Councillor Burt, and Councillor Cowan, Councillor Suggett, and Councillor Hewitt. I think I've covered everybody. And you're all very welcome to the committee today. And as I say, if you wish to speak, please indicate in the same way as members. Okay, so we move on to item 7, annual report on standards arrangements and update on model code of conduct consultation on page 9 of your agendas. Mark, or is it Rory? Sorry, Rory, are you presenting?
Yep. Yeah, that one's me, Chairman. Thank you. Yeah, this report just gives a brief overview of the standards work that has taken place during the year up to the 31st of March 2020. Also provides a short update on the current position with the proposed LGA model code of conduct following the recent consultation process. So looking at the standards complaints first, as you'll see from the report, there has been an increase in the number of complaints from 21 in the years 2018-19 to 28 in 2019-20. Just to give some context to these figures, this is largely as a result of a significant number of complaints relating to one particular parish, which were received early in 2020. This particular parish accounted for 11 of the complaints received. Of the remaining 17 complaints, 7 related to Breckland District Council members, and the remaining 10 related to members from other parishes throughout the district. Just to move on to the model code of conduct update, members will remember receiving details of the consultation document back in early June, and were encouraged to respond directly to the LGA through their consultation portal. This consultation closed in mid-August, and together with Hoey Ainscoe, who have been appointed to work with the LGA to develop the new code, a final draft will be presented to the LGA General Assembly in the autumn. On the back of this, the LGA have then promised to create additional guidance, working examples and explanatory text based on the new model code. On this basis, a subsequent report will be brought back before this committee at a later date, following the introduction of the new model code, to consider any changes to the Council's current arrangements as a result of the introduction of the code. Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to take and answer any questions if I can.
A quick question from me. When you say this is likely to come back, do we have any idea of the timescale? It
depends on when the model code is published. The current time frame is the autumn. So it could be any time now. If it is in the next few weeks, then obviously we'll look to bring it back to the December meeting. If we don't receive anything till later on in the year, then it will be the first meeting of the new year.
Thank you. I have Councillor Clark indicating.
Thank you, Chairman. Just unmuting myself. Yeah, thank you very much, Rory, for that report. Yes, I've read through the report, and I did make my own personal submission to the LGA. There's sort of 2 things occur to me. One is obviously when this does come back to us, I'm aware obviously that some, if not all, towns and parishes sometimes adopt the Breckland code, you know, for sort of ease and consistency, not necessarily because people have got dual membership. So that will obviously, members who are also on towns and parishes may need to reflect that. The other thing is in terms of the worked examples, sometimes that can't always be exhaustive. And we have, for example, like the Nolan principles of public life, and sometimes we know what those mean, you know, selflessness, integrity, honesty, objectivity, etc. I don't know, Chairman, if yourself or other officers may know about this, whether there are going to be any sort of examples of what might or might not be acceptable behaviour. And the question for Rory is whether the code will encompass, obviously there may be standards of conduct between members and the public, between the public and members, and also between members and staff, because that can be a two-way process where someone's in a position of authority, so that can as it were cut way. So with one of my sort of part of my background, just done a refresher in employment law. So though we have the code of conduct, over and above that there are various things such as harassment, bullying, etc. Obviously when that goes beyond a particular point, that's where you will obviously have workplace, for example, either paid employees, workplace policies in place, but there will also be areas where the law may impinge regardless of the code of conduct. So that's really just two sort of observations, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your observations, Councillor Carr. I've got Councillor Burt.
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose following on from some of the things which I said at full council, I wonder whether this committee, in its governance role, has confidence that the existing standard system is working properly as intended. I mean, I gave some examples before, and I think there are some very significant issues. I mean, having been through the process and actually being asked by an officer running the standard system to break a protocol, and the reason I was asked to do that was because they didn't know that the protocol existed, does sound, you know, a very serious matter. It's hardly a minor, trivial thing, and yet it all seems to have been brushed under the carpet. I wonder whether this committee might actually take this further and ensure that the standard system is operating properly. One other slight comment on our constitution and the Nolan principles, which Harry was talking about. I just wonder why we have changed the Nolan principles in our constitution. We seem to have modified them in a way which is pushing them towards commercial work and has a commercial bent to it, rather than taking them as written by the Nolan Commission.
Okay, can we just deal with the second part of Councillor Burt's question, the issue of us amending the Nolan principles in some sort of some commercial way? Rory Ring, do you have any comment on that?
I was hoping that Mark may be able to help me out on that one if he's here.
Chairman, I'm not aware that we have ever intentionally changed the text of the Nolan principles in the Constitution. So I would perhaps ask if Councillor Burt could let me, perhaps offline, have an understanding of what it is he's identified in the Constitution, and I will certainly take a look at it. It's not, as I say, something that I have instigated, nor I suspect anybody else in this meeting, but I'm more than happy to take a look at it if Councillor Burt can notify me of the issue.
Thank you. Now, obviously, the item under discussion here is the specific report. On the other points, Councillor Burt, I think it would probably be best if you submitted a question to me, as in my role as chairman of Audit, because we've not had any correspondence in the past, and I will look at that and come back to you. And I think if there's anything then that I think that we should bring to the committee, I will share that correspondence with the committee, and they can then decide on the course of action. But that isn't the item that we're discussing today, but I would happy to look at your concern.
Okay, I will do that.
Thank you. Julie.
Chairman, can I just say your sound is you keep breaking up and it's very quiet in places. I don't know whether there's anything.
Is there any way that the volume could be adjusted? I'm not sure.
It's better when you move forward, actually, Bill.
I'm already very close to my screen, so okay, I'll shout at everybody. Is that?
Can I chip in there, because I've actually had the same issue before. There are some settings in Zoom. If you actually go to the audio down on the bottom, you can set them to manual, because I found that there was a problem with the automatic settings would keep sweeping up and down.
I'm on manual. It says switch phone. Oh, hang on. Microphone. Speakers. Audio settings.
I think if you untick adjust volume automatically.
Right, I've just done that. Is that better?
Sounds better at the moment. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, we'll try that then. Thanks. Okay, any other comments from members on this item? Okay, we are asked to, the recommendation is to note the contents of the report. Are members happy we've done that? Anyone against? Lovely. Okay, thank you. We now move on to item 8, which is constitution, non-key officer discussions, licensing report from the Cabinet member Sarah Suggett and Officer Mark Stinson. Would either of you like to go first? Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this is a fairly technical report, so I'll take members through it and then obviously happy to take any questions. The Governance and Audit Committee, I'm sure members will recall, instructed me to change the process for changing the Constitution so that we consult with Governance and Audit Committee first. Then we will take this matter through Overview and Scrutiny Commission and then finally on to Council. And it's been a few months since we've done a constitutional report, so we've got a number of changes, mostly relatively minor or just to comply with statute. But the first and most substantial one, Chairman, is the matter relating to call-in. And I think this really just deserves a degree of debate amongst members, because there's a balance to be found between the speed of decision making and the level of scrutiny of the decisions. In 2012, Chairman, regulations were introduced which required officer decisions that were executive in nature to be published. Prior to that, the only published officer decisions were those that were classified as key decisions. So those are decisions which have either a significant financial effect or a significant impact in the community. So up until that point, all of the other officer decisions that were executive in nature were not published. Now, the way that our constitution is drafted makes it clear that any executive decision, wherever and however it's made, if it is a published decision, it is subject to call-in. So the effect of the 2012 regulations, the intention of those regulations were openness and transparency. So making sure that where an officer was making a decision that was executive in nature, it was published and that members of the public were aware of it. But because of the way our constitution is worded, the default position for us now is that all of those are subject to call-in. Now, one of the issues that we have as officers is that there is no clarity in the regulations as to where you draw the line as to what is an executive decision and what isn't. So it basically says something along the lines of anything which is closely related to an executive decision. So very often we are taking executive actions, but they follow on from an earlier decision that members have already made. So if we take something as simple as placing an order for supplies, for example. If it's a small order, you wouldn't expect to have thousands of officer decisions being published and clogging up the system. But somebody has to make a judgment about where to draw that line. As a result, I've been asking officers to think very carefully and to where in doubt, to publish their decisions. And I'm sure those members who've been on the council for some years will have noticed an increase in the number of officer decisions that are published. But as I say, the flip side of that is that if they're subject to call-in, there's always going to be an inbuilt delay, so we're not able to react perhaps as quickly as we would otherwise. So all of those decisions are still subject to scrutiny. Members of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission, and indeed this committee, can still call officers to account if they're unhappy with the way that a decision has been made. But the issue is whether we continue to operate the call-in system for those lower level officer decisions. So the recommendation that I've included in the report, Chairman, is that where an officer decision is published but it is not a key decision, it not be subject to call-in. As I say, I completely appreciate that there is a balance between the speed of decision making and the importance of scrutiny, and I think it's for members to make a decision around how they feel most comfortable. At that point, Chairman, I'll defer to any questions.
Councillor Kyburn, you indicated.
Thank you, Chairman. Just 2 or 3 points. Page 21, Appendix B, has animal welfare as a second item D, and it should be E. And then further on that paragraph, page 21, Appendix B2, refers to the Health and Safety Work Act 1974. I wonder whether the words in brackets "as amended" should be included, as that tends to be how the legislation is written. And on page 22, 22.2.2, there are 4 clauses there that can cause that clause to come into action, but it's not clear whether they are either or and clauses. If it's any of those things, I think the rule should state so. And then on page 24, item 56.1 advises that the chief executive should write to the member. 2 questions. 1, does it have to be the chief executive? And 2nd, should the word should become shall? Thank you.
Mark, back to you.
Chairman, they're all reasonable points. Clearly there is a typographical error in the D, which should be an E. On those other points, rather than me try and sit and work through the wording now, if members are comfortable, I will take that away, and Julie will have a note of that, and I'll make sure that those comments are addressed as we take it through process when it goes to Overview and Scrutiny Commission, and then on to Council. So they will not be missed. But if there is a need to make changes, Chairman, on my reflection, then obviously I'll pick those up and I'll make sure that the Council is aware that those were suggested.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to write to Mark, but yes, thank you for your report. Yes, I fully appreciate the need for speed and not clogging areas up where we've actually taken a decision and officer just implementing. Some of this, I think, is really about, if you like, the potential for things to be called in. I may have missed it in one of the reports, but has Mark any figures, or possibly Rory, in terms of the where things have actually been called in? Obviously, you say we still have got the right on governance and audit and scrutiny to call matters in or hold or look at hold those particular issues to account, particularly when we look at performance indicators, whether it's at scrutiny or here. But this is more about the potential rather than what's happened. So if Mark is able today, or if not at another time, to say, well, over the last 2 years or so, we've had you know, hundreds of decisions, and we've only had 3 called in, for example. So I can see that it's obviously going to, even though we haven't necessarily had the call-ins, the effect of this would be to actually have those decisions implemented in practice much more quickly. Thank you.
Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't have the figures, but I can say, and Rory may be able to add to this, but I can say it's very rare. I think I can recall 1 call-in in the past couple of years. And of course, every decision that is made and isn't called in, which is the vast majority clearly, there is an inbuilt delay because we can't implement the decision until we've waited for 5 clear working days. So I believe it's been 1 in the last couple of years, Councillor Clark, but no doubt Rory will correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Any other comments from members of the committee or attending councillors? Right. Well, thank you very much for that. Just looking at Appendix A, I don't know if I've misread where it says paragraph 7. Is this changing the constitution to be in line with the legislation where it says, and you're adding in and non-key decisions made by officers? Because on first reading that, it seems to be the opposite of what you're proposing. So that's page 20, Appendix A. Mark, you're on mute.
I do apologise, Sir Chairman. Yeah, those changes are simply to reflect the change from all officer decisions being subject to call-in to only key officer decisions being subject to call-in. Those changes don't make any difference to all other executive decisions. Only.
But the first paragraph says, and non-key decisions made by officers. Should that be key, or have I misread the paragraph?
I do apologise, Chairman. I think you're right. I think that's a typographical error.
So the,
yes,
the non should be removed.
The non should be removed, Chairman. You're quite right.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Well,
Chairman, is it helpful for me to take us through the other items as well as call-in? I wanted to pause at that point so that we could talk about the call-in issue.
Well, the information is all in the papers. So I think Councillor Kyburg, you wanted to come in here? No. So I'm happy to take any comments from the members. Is there any further comments on the other items? No? Well, then I would propose that we return to the recommendations, and subject to the amendment of that first paragraph on page 20 to remove the word non. Are you happy with that, Mark? But subject to that.
Absolutely, and thank you for picking that up, Chairman.
I would propose that we take the recommendations on block on page 14 and 15. All members of the committee who are in favour, please show. Councillor Kyburg, thank you. Right, that's duly carried. Anybody against? Lovely, thank you. So we move on now to item 9, audit results report 1920. And we have Mark Hodgson here from Ernst & Young. You're very welcome, Mark. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Appreciate this is the first time for this financial year that we have been able to meet because of COVID, and clearly our audit plan was circulated in the summer remotely rather than me being able to present directly to you. So my plan was to walk you through in a bit more detail than I usually would our approach this year, taking into consideration the additional procedures that COVID has presented, plus remote working, and then give you kind of a high level overview of the summary, and then take questions if that was okay, Chair.
Fine, that's far away.
Okay, so bearing in mind that COVID has had a significant impact on this year's set of financial statements and therefore the audit, specifically in relation to property, plant and equipment valuations, pension valuations, and going concern considerations and assessment. And I will touch on all of those specifically in a moment. Equally to note that the timeline for publication of the Financial statements has moved from the 31st of July to the 30th of November. And clearly we're sitting here some 6-7 weeks ahead of that, which is a good news place to be. So if you can keep all of that in context while we go through the key messages, I think it will play out to my final summary. So starting on your page 13, I don't need you to go straight to the pages, but just pulling out some key data from our report. Page 30 has our materiality level in it. We've set it at 1.376 million this year based on your gross expenditure. And that level gives rise to what would be a significant error in the financial statements or not. Page 31 links to the outstanding work we had when we issued the report last week, and the three main areas of property, plant and equipment, pensions and going concern are those big ticket items related to COVID audit procedures. So I will take some time to narrate you through what the issue is and where we are with those. So in terms of property, plant and equipment evaluations, clearly they are valuations as at the 31st of March, which was roughly 4 weeks into the global pandemic. RICS, who are the advising body to all professional valuers, told their valuation personnel to include a clause in their valuation reports which stated there would be a material uncertainty over valuations at the 31st of March because of the non-existence of a ready active market for assets, i.e. the buying and selling of assets had stopped because of lockdown, and therefore giving an accurate figure at that point in time was in doubt, and therefore that clause was in every valuer report across the UK. Clearly things move. A ready active market has subsequently re-engaged, and there are updated market information reports coming through from valuers, which is highlighting what change, if any, has happened or would have happened to those valuation dates. In terms of audit procedures, the most significantly impacted are those assets that you hold in your portfolio which are valued on fair value, i.e. they are purely market-driven valuations. And as you have a quite significant investment property portfolio, all of those assets get captured by that. Other assets are impacted to a lesser extent, but we need to consider all of those in the round. Clearly, part of audit procedures is considering those fair value assets, and we have engaged our real estate experts to look at the valuation basis that your valuer has used and whether the range for those assets is appropriate to the valuations disclosed in your accounts. Clearly, given the size of your investment portfolio, that work is currently in the process of being concluded. The second big area is around pension valuations, and on your balance sheet you have the liability for your element of Norfolk Pension Fund. The issues are primarily at the pension fund end, but link through to what your ultimate liability figure is. So clearly with a 31st of March balance sheet date for the pension fund, the market for asset values in the pension fund was incredibly volatile and saw quite a significant drop. Norfolk Pension Fund hold quite a lot of what are termed level 3 investments, which are non-standard, non-quoted investments, which clearly by default are harder to value and are usually valued at least 3 months in arrears. So the 31st of March valuations were based on a 31st of December report from fund managers, and clearly a lot happened between the 31st of December and the 31st of March, and therefore updated reports are coming through from fund managers in June and July about what that impact was going back to the 31st of March. In addition, we've also had the pleasure of the pension fund being the recipient of its triennial review. So the actuary reviews all the data from admitted bodies which drive the liability figure. So we've had to test check all of the data that goes to the actuary that feeds that model. And then members may remember that last year we were discussing the impact of the McLeod judgment and the impact on the liability figure following a court case where somebody challenged the principles upon which pensions are derived. There's been a subsequent consultation on the remedy for that this summer, which was published, and that has again challenged the assumptions used by actuaries in deriving that liability figure. Hymans, who are the actuary to Norfolk Pension Fund, are one of the actuaries whose assumptions are subject to challenge currently, and we're working through the process of understanding how they got to their assumptions for their model and what impact that may have on the liability figure. And then we move on to going concern. And the issue with going concern is, whilst we all recognise that the services provided by a public sector body in the UK will continue in principle and are underwritten by central government, that doesn't accord with international accounting standards, which need us to assess whether the liquidity of the council and the reserve position of the council adequately supports that going concern premise for 12 months from the audit opinion date. And given that the audit opinion date could be up to the 30th of November, we're talking about financial plans through to November 2021. That takes into account 2 financial municipal years, the second of which does not have a local government funding settlement in place for yet. So clearly there is a question over the long-term financial going concern of every entity in the UK. So clearly there are audit and management considerations about how you evidence going concern from a financial reporting perspective, as opposed to a service provision perspective. And we've had to work through those, and Alison and management have provided that assessment, and we are working through it. So those are the 3 areas which are currently outstanding, but are all underway and good progress is being made. And I'll provide a quick update on where we are and what's outstanding for those. But I thought I'd give the view on why they're so significant to us this year. So in terms of property, plant and equipment valuations, we're just waiting for our valuer to come back with our ranges. In the next 2 weeks, we're not expecting anything significant based on their early work and their early feedback to us, though we may require some additional disclosure around the estimation uncertainty note. In terms of pension valuations, we've almost completed the pension fund audit. The investment values have moved a little bit, but not materially at the fund level. And when you work that out for admitted body, it is not material to Breckland at the admitted body level. And the McLeod consultation, I know a rerun report has been produced by the actuary, and Alison will be updating the liability figures within the revised financial statements for that. But again, it's a reduction in the liability, and again, not material. In terms of going concern, we're just completing our considerations on the management's assessment and the adequacy of the disclosure note within the financial statements. In terms of audit differences, which are on page 32 of your papers, if you park those 3 big areas, which I am linking to coronavirus linked audit considerations, we have no unadjusted audit differences to report to you. And we have no numeric adjustments to the financial statements in terms of primary statement numbers. We have just requested some additional disclosure in relation to going concern and around estimation uncertainty. In terms of audit risks, these start on page 35 and link back to the risks that are in our audit plan. In terms of fraud indicators and management being able to override controls should they so wish on page 35, and then the incorrect capitalisation of revenue expenditure on page 36. We have not identified any issues as a result of our testing. In terms of valuation of property, plant and equipment and pensions on pages 37 and 38, I've taken you through those issues. We're just waiting for our reports and assurances to come in, but there are no items identified at the current point as a result of our testing. In relation to non-domestic rate appeals on page 39, we've got no issues coming from our testing to report to you. And then in terms of going concern, we have management's assessment, and we're just working through stress testing that, sensitivity testing that, and the adequacy of the disclosure. So overall, as a result of the audit procedures on the other kind of 80% of areas of your financial statements, there aren't those 3 big ticket items, we have no significant matters to report to you as a committee. Therefore, page 41 sets out our proposed audit report, which would be unqualified on the basis of the completion of those procedures and satisfactory resolution of those 3 big areas that I mentioned. Audit differences, there are none to bring to your attention, and our request for a letter of representation is only for standard representation. So we have, through the audit process, got all the assurances that we need from our testing and from working papers provided by Alison and the finance team. In terms of value for money on page 49, we didn't identify any significant risks, and our work on your standard arrangements would lead us to conclude that there are adequate arrangements in place, and therefore there will be an unqualified value for money conclusion as part of our audit report. So overall, as a committee, whilst there are those 3 areas that I need to resolve after this meeting, my overall comment would be that we received a very good set of draft financial statements from Alison earlier in the summer. We've had a good audit throughout the summer and early autumn, acknowledging that both Alison and her team been working remotely, and our team has clearly had to work remotely. Doing an audit electronically has been a challenge, but has gone pretty well, I think, and Alison can comment on that. We do clearly have some key assurances to gain over our COVID-related audit procedures, but they are all in hand, and we would therefore plan to sign, subject to receiving those, in the next 2-week period. So I think sitting here today on October the, whatever it is, 9th, we're in a good position ahead of that publication deadline. And I think we should, as an audit firm, recognise the work and support that Alison and your finance team have provided to us over that period. And clearly, I'll pause now and happy to take any specific questions on what I've said or directly from any page of our report, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I would like to just congratulate Alison and her team for such a glowing report from any comments on Mark's presentation? Right, so we've got Councillor Kyburd and then we have John.
Thank you, Chairman. Mark, in your on page 32 of your report, as regards the going concern basis, you said that has resulted in the addition of note 31 in the accounts, but that note has the highest numbered note in the accounts is 30. So is that something to be completed following your review? Thank you.
I think, well, you have spotted a nuance. Alison and I have agreed that there will be a note 31, and we have agreed the wording for it. I hadn't acknowledged that it hadn't found its way into the revised set before you today.
Okay, thank you.
John.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to mention the note 31 as well. Obviously, the concern you have about property, plant and equipment and pensions could be quite significant on our accounts. What sort of timescale have you got, Mark, on completing that review? I don't know that you mentioned that today.
I hope to be able to be in a position to sign in the next 2 weeks. So the work is well underway and is due for return to us in that period with a view to signing at the end of 2 weeks.
From what you said, I gather that you're reasonably comfortable that there won't be a major, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but reasonably comfortable that what we've got won't significantly change. Is that right?
So let me work through the 3 areas that I mentioned. So property, plant and equipment, early indications are that we have all the information we need for our expert to come up with a range for the asset valuations. There have been some issues with those ranges in other places so far, hence why it's a risk. Clearly, if your asset value falls outside of our range, we'll have to speak to Alison about adjustments or additional information from your valuer, but based on the information I have to date, we're relatively comfortable it will fall within the range. In terms of pension fund, the asset valuation issue has no material impact for you. Hyman's review of the assumptions behind the McLeod judgment is unlikely to be material, but we need to clearly work it through. And then the triennial review has not highlighted any control issues at the pension fund issue. So none of those are likely to give rise to any adjustments, but clearly I need the assurance letters to come through to be able to sign the audit opinion. And then in terms of the going concern assessment, as I noted, Alison and I have agreed the disclosure note, so you can take some level of comfort from that I'm relatively happy. I just need to tick some boxes and test check some of the data that Alison used in her assumptions behind it before we're ready to physically sign. So property, plant and equipment is the one area where there has the biggest potential for some further adjustments. But as we're working within a range and you've got a specific value, if it sits in that range, I'm comfortable.
Thank you. I was actually surprised at the pension reduction in liabilities due to the state of the markets, but hey, who am I? I'm not an actuary, so I have to trust their judgments. Can I take you to page 57, please, which is I think the independent section. If I can just find it on my computer. I was slightly confused on the chart of audit fees. There seemed to be some well, it sort of implied the proposed fee. I understand the standard audit charge 34,000, but then there's additional specified one-off work was also shown as 34,000. Is that right?
So looking at the page I have in front of me, so the far right-hand column is last year's audit fee. The middle column is the scale fee that is set by the regulator 2 years ago, which is what they think the fee should be for the audit. And then the left-hand numeric column is where we think that scale fee and audit work are. So the scale fee, the first line is the same because that is what the regulator have nominated for this audit, so the 34,293. The second line is what we as a firm are indicating is the additional fee to address the risk inherent within the audit, the additional responsibilities that we have to address regulatory requirements in the audit, and how IT is enabling our audit to be completed, which are the note 1 items, which is, I concur, a big figure, but this is the basis of why the recently published Redmond review was commissioned in the first place, in that scale fees were set in 2010 and haven't been updated since then. But audit risk has clearly changed significantly. The business of the council has changed and therefore driven different audit risks, such as group, for example, and the regulatory landscape for all audit firms within the profession, both private sector and public sector, is extraordinarily different from it was in 2010 based on public expectations, financial reporting, council requirements, etc. So we think the appropriate scale fee should be £59,140. That is the figure that Christine and I have spoken about, but it's not for Christine and I to opine on it, it's for public sector audit appointments to opine on it as the regulator and contract holder. So I have, for transparency, set out the communications I had with Christine and put it there. It is for the regulator to determine what we're remunerated for, in essence, under their scale fee regime. Over and the top of that is the note 2 items, because clearly the scale fee is based on an ordinary year. And as I'm sure all of you can appreciate, 2020 isn't an ordinary year, and there are those additional audit procedures that I have talked about in relation to COVID-19 around property, plant and equipment valuations, going concern and pensions. So hopefully, John, that narrates you through the table.
Thank you. I was somewhat confused by it, but I understand now. Thank you very much. And the final comment, the management representation letter, has the council not issued that yet? I'm surprised. It looked pretty standard to me, standard sort of terms and reference.
It is a standard request for one, and I wouldn't expect Alison to give it to me until the date I'm signing, because we need it to be up to and including the opinion date.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Councillor Hewitt, I noticed you were nodding, indicating a point with regards to the valuations. Did you want to make a point?
Yeah, I mean, the only point was just listening to Mark there that actually on all three options, and I note that John asked this question, in all three areas, it seems to be that any adjustments to the final accounts will be in the form of additional disclosure rather than financial adjustments, because in each of those instances, the potential financial adjustments will either be immaterial, or in the context of range of values for commercial property, the range is broadly, from the auditor's perspective, in line with our officers' own range. And that was the point. So the amounts themselves are broadly material. I should say, Mark, my background is an accountant, so I can hear where you're coming from, particularly where the where you talk in terms of the pension valuation. That's been a great frustration for this committee, in particular when I used to sit on it for a very long time, and I don't think it'll be resolved this year. Thank you, Bill.
Indeed.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hewitt. Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I very, very much appreciate actually the difficulty of completing this at the moment. Yes, we all difficult positions. I note that it's you're really 2 weeks away before we actually have some sort of finality to this. Would it be possible though to have an update perhaps sent round to all the members, including the non-members of the committee, in 2 weeks' time, just to indicate where we are? I mean, we've kind of turned up today, and it could be a fair while before we know what else is happening.
I mean, it is proposed to, sorry, Alison, go on.
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. I think that comes up in my report next, that we would propose that we send the changes round.
Okay, so if everybody is happy with what Mark has been through, I would like to take us on to item 10, the audited annual statement of accounts 2019-20 on page 71 of your agenda.
Thank you, Chairman. So this report really reflects a lot of what Mark has already said in the last item, so I shan't repeat everything that he's just gone through. The report details the changes that have been made to the accounts since we sent them round back in June. So thank you everyone for your questions that you sent round to me back then. Hopefully they were all answered. Now the team are really pleased with how it's gone this year. It's been challenging and the audit has been different with it being remote, but they've worked really well, so we're really pleased with that. As the committee doesn't meet now until December after today, the report proposes that the authority is delegated to the Section 151 officer in conjunction with the chair of this committee to make any changes to the accounts as the result of audit. And to approve the accounts, the letter of representation. And that would mean that we'd get them all done by the deadline of the 30th of November. And as the report says, we would also make sure that all the changes and the new notes and any changes to other disclosures would be sent round by email. So you would have a chance to comment or question those before the accounts were finally signed off. So I'm happy to take any questions on the changes to the accounts or accounts at all, but otherwise I think everything's in the report.
Thank you. Well, members of the committee, over to you. Any comments? Councillor Carter and John Baskett.
Thank you, Chairman. Really, one or two questions about the detail in the accounts. On page 115, depreciation last year has gone from 521k to 3.17 million. Perhaps we could just understand that a little bit better. And to note on page 133, the inland revenue penalties paid. Thank you.
Sorry, which page was the inland revenue?
133, 26k for penalties on staff allowances.
Okay, so I'll do 133 first, if that's okay. This was where we had identified a few years ago that we hadn't been treating the mileage payments for shared staff between South Holland and Breckland correctly. So we raised it and did a disclosure to HMRC, and we set some money aside at that time, but it's taken quite some time to resolve it with HMRC. But I'm pleased to say they didn't issue any fines. We just paid across the amount that we should have paid across before. So that's that one. Page 115, the depreciation and impairment values do vary quite wildly year on year. And for 1920, the impairments have been slightly higher than in other years. For example, 2018-19 may have been switched the other way around. There may have been more upward valuations, and this year there were more downward valuations. So that one does range quite differently year on year.
Sorry, I was on mute. John, it's your turn.
Thank you. Hi, Alison. A few questions, a few comments, really, if I may. Just going back to the beginning. On a personal view, and I appreciate it's not my decision, it's for the committee members to make, but I would not personally feel comfortable with, just trying to find the right page now, page 71. Forgive me. Yeah, the recommendation that the accounts are approved by the Section 151 officer and just the chairman personally doesn't sit comfortably with me, and I don't think that's necessarily good governance. But if the committee is satisfied with it, then that's fine. But I personally, when I read it, I was uncomfortable with that and felt that should be a committee decision to make. Moving on to page 83, 81, 82, 83, what did I have? Yeah, on that chart, that pie chart, there's a comment on to the right of it on that table. It talks about fees, charges and miscellaneous. Probably the second largest number on there, but we don't actually make any comment on what's included in that. And I just felt perhaps with such a large number, there should be some explanation of what's included in that. Do you want to answer that first, Alison, or should I move on?
Shall I answer as we go? Will that be
Yeah,
easy?
thank you. That would be helpful.
So in terms of the delegation point, I hear what you're saying, and in an ideal world, we would ask the committee to approve. We're in strange times, is all I can say, and you wouldn't expect to do that in a normal year. The fees, charges and miscellaneous, we can certainly add some description on that. That's our fees and charges for things like planning, licensing, recycling, credits, income, garden waste bins, all of those sorts of service charges that we make.
I just feel that these accounts presumably go into the public domain. So to prevent unnecessary questions in the future, it might be sensible to at least outline some of the major costs within that. Just a personal view on that. If you're happy and the committee's happy, then I'm happy to move on.
Could I just comment on the approval point? I think it may be just some nuanced wording which may just need changing as part of a recommendation proposal, but it is relatively standard for a committee to approve the accounts. You would approve the accounts before you today, subject to any late audit adjustments that would be delegated to Christine and the chair if they were material to consider. And any material ones would be reported back to the committee through our updated audit results report, just so you had the full detail. So it's not unusual for a committee to approve it today, subject to minor late adjustments. So I think it might be the nuanced wording of the recommendation may need to change.
Okay, well, I think if you're proposing that, Mark, I certainly, as a committee member, can propose it on your behalf. I think we ought to agree what it ought to say at this point, because if we're then going to agree the recommendation, we need to be clear on what it actually says. I'm happy for the any changes to be circulated to the committee and receive feedback before I agree. So even though the decision would be mine, I would be happy to consult with members of the committee before making that decision, so that they would all have sight of any amendments. Julie, you've got your hand up.
Sorry, Chair, it's very difficult to hear what you're saying again. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm talking much louder now. Is that? Did you hear that, or do I need to say that again?
Well, I think you need to say it again. Sorry.
No, that's fine. As chairman on the issue of, I think we ought to have agreed now Mark's proposals to amend, to nuance, I think was his word, the recommendation, so that we know exactly what we're agreeing to in the recommendations. And secondly, I was saying that as chairman, I'd be happy to consult the members of the committee prior to using my delegated authority, and I would include any feedback from members prior to making that decision. Mark, do you want to just go through what you would suggest we amend the recommendation to actually say?
Certainly. I think the recommendation should read: the committee approves the financial statements before it today, subject to any late audit adjustments, which would be approved through delegation by the Section 151 officer, and if material, the chair of this committee.
John, how does that sound to you? This is your concern.
Right, if I'm honest. I mean, I think for me, the committee needs to have sight of the final results. We don't necessarily need to have a committee meeting, but we should all have sight of it before you approve it, Chairman.
Yes, I mean, I think that's what I just committed to doing. So
that's not, I didn't get that inference from what Mark had suggested.
Well, hopefully the minutes of this meeting will reflect that that's what I said in the meeting. So if you could make sure, Julie, that's explicitly outlined in the minutes. Any other comments?
You had Councillor Cowan.
Or questions? Councillor Cowan, I'm so sorry. Over to you.
You're quite all right, Bill.
Councillor Cowan.
Nice to see you. I just wanted to say a few things. Firstly, the fact that we can't, as a committee, you can't sign off these accounts today is actually not a bad thing, given the pandemic and the situation which has been identified by Mark in his report. I'd also like to say that I think, if I recall rightly, this won't be the first time the committee hasn't been able to sign things off on this day, and that delegation has been given to the Section 151 officer and the chairman of the committee in the past as well, because there have been minor things hanging out at the end, as we have here. But in this particular case, I think everyone should take heart from what Mark has actually told us, and that with a couple of weeks to go before he gets the final information, Ernst & Young can find at the moment nothing to suggest that the accounts in the draft form are going to change in any material way. And I think for everybody, that is a significant benchmark that we should be rightly proud of as a council. And the team have put these figures together and all the background that's gone to Ernst & Young in the straitened times that we're in should be congratulated. I understand John's particular concern, because why else would a governance and audit committee meet if not to sign something off? But I think in the circumstances that we're all facing, what you've got before you is a really good report from our external auditors. And everyone should be congratulated that we've been able to get there in this particular time. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Cowden. Any other comments before I go to the recommendations? John.
Thank you. Sorry, I hadn't quite finished on some of the questions on Alison on page 87.
Oh, I do apologise.
No, that's okay. I usually run on a bit at this stage of the meeting on accounts, so forgive me. On page 87, Alison, which talks about capital investment, again, bearing in mind that these will go into the public domain, we talk about capital investment we've this year of spent 4.6 million. We don't actually make any comment as to what that capital investment was spent on. I wonder whether under the note we should state that.
So what I usually do, and it's in here somewhere, so I'll try and make it more obvious, is I link it to the Cabinet Outturn report, which has all the full detail on our capital and revenue spend. So rather than repeating it, I'll make sure the link to that report is clearer.
There is a link. There will be a link. Okay. Thank you. On page 93, what did I have on 93? Oh, I think, yeah, just a comment about risk, and when but we discussed that earlier, so we'll pass on that one. On page 98, there was a significant increase in spend on growth and commercialisation directorate. I normally look at the 2 years and see what's changed in any significant form. That was perhaps the most significant one. Do you have a reason why that increase, sort of 59% increase over the year?
Could I send that to you by email after the meeting, because I don't have the answer right with me.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, fine. Page 102. Yeah, I was slightly confused over the purchase of short and long-term investments, which was both debited and credited. There's a big change from the previous year, and also and proceeds from short and long-term investments. There's 123 million, is that? Down from 183 million the previous year. I was confused what that was, and could you explain it? If you want to do that afterwards offline, that's fine by me.
That one's a slightly easier one. It's a very misleading figure, because these are the investments that we put in or out, and it just relates really to the length of investment. So in 18-19 we must have been doing much more short-term investments, maybe for a week or a month at a time, whereas in the current financial year 19-20 we must have done much more longer-term ones, and so the value is lower.
180 million, is that right? Would that have been 180 million last year?
That's the cumulative.
John, we lost you for a moment there. Do you want to repeat that, please?
Sorry, I was just surprised. It was shown last year as 183.6 million. Is that right?
Yes, that is right, but we don't have 183 million in our bank, sadly.
No. It just seemed a big number. That's all. I suppose that's the total accumulative figure over the year, is it? Okay. On, I think, page 115, I think one of the councillors has mentioned. Did I have another question on that? Housing benefit. I was surprised that housing benefits were less this year than last year, bearing in mind that the additional work we had to do with for the homeless. Did you want to comment on that?
Yes, actually, our housing benefit claim numbers have been, or had been, going down. So it makes quite a significant impact on the value. I think you'll find that they'll have gone back up by the we look at 2021 accounts.
Oh, will they? Okay. Thank you. I'm just going on to page 139. 139, if I can just call it up. 139, what did I? Yeah, again, this is not really for me to comment on, but bear in mind this is going to go into the public domain. Officers' remuneration was a significant increase on the executive director strategy and governance monitoring, a 20% increase in salaries over the year. Can we and should we explain that before somebody asks the question? And some of the other executive managers, the increase was what I would say above inflation. So should we comment on that?
The reasons for the increase are in an election year, your monitoring officer will receive an extra payment for the election. I forget what the actual term is, sorry, a returning officer, I think. And the remainder of the increases are simply our annual pay rise of 2% last year, plus an increment, plus the pension, change in pensions, which contributions. So they are fairly standard. I'm not sure it merits a note. They are what they are, I'm afraid.
Well, they're about 4.5%, except for the executive director strategy and governance, which is 20%. I mean, that in the public's view, that would be seen as a significant increase. And
John, I think what Alison's just said is that person is a returning officer, so there's a different job to be done on a year with a general election. So it's a payment that's not directly comparable with the previous year.
Would it be sensible to comment on that, or don't you think so?
I don't think we have in the past. I mean, we can put in a note. Councillor Kyburg.
I think our previous leader comments on this. It is a quirk of the electoral system that the returning officer is remunerated separately to their day job, and because it's paid through us, we have to report on it. But it's an artifact of statute rather than of design, I would suggest.
John, back to you.
Thank you. Obviously, that will go down next year then.
Unless there's another election, John. You're on mute, John.
Thank you. So it's a good point. I will stop there. That's the end of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I haven't noticed that anybody else has indicated a wish to speak. Right, okay, in that case, I would take you to page 71 for the recommendations. So we have I propose to take the recommendations as amended by Mark Hodgson's proposal. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Anyone against? Okay, thank you very much. We now move on to item 11, the annual report and opinion from the internal audit. And Fiona, we have you. Thank you very much for attending. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is a report that Faye Hayward has prepared as at year end for last year's internal audit delivery. As you'll be pleased to see that we gave it a reasonable assurance. This is based on the back of 12 assurance reports being issued, 7 of which were substantial assurance and 5 that were reasonable assurance. We haven't issued any limited or no assurance reports last year, which is a very good sign. And we have issued reports with a position statement that don't give an assurance rating. In terms of the outstanding draft reports for last year, due to COVID hitting, there were 2 draft reports remaining outstanding at year end, one of which has now been finalised, and there is 1 report that we're in discussions with management at the moment to come to a conclusion to finalise that report. The details in that report, those reports as it stands at the moment haven't changed, so the recommendations that you will see come through in terms of the follow-up won't have changed since that point as well. In terms of the overall annual report and opinion, we have a lot of the background detail identifying how we go through the process for the year and including the quality assurance and improvement processes that we go through to make sure that we comply with the standards across the year. And you'll be pleased to know that we have complied with those standards. In terms of an external assessment, the last external assessment was carried out in January 2017, confirming that we do conform to the professional standards, and this is undertaken every 5 years, so it's not due just yet. You have to excuse me, my dog's about to bark. In terms of the performance indicator outcomes, it's very pleasing to see that for the majority of the quality performance standards, we have achieved or exceeded what we needed to. There was one report in Q3. We missed the deadline for issuing that report by 1 day due to in terms of signing off the report for issue. So that's very pleasing. Moving through the report, we talk about the how we meet our standards, and then we go to the appendices. I wasn't intending to go through any of the appendices. They have been presented as a plan and progress report throughout the year. So this is just a summary to show you what we have completed and what's already been reported to you. Perhaps if there are any questions.
Thank you, Fiona. Members of the committee, over to you. John. John, we can't hear you. I don't know why, because you're not muted. But,
is that any better?
That's much better, yes.
Thank you. I may be covering up my microphone with my papers, so forgive me. Can I take you to page 189? And it's a point I've raised on audits many times. It says a total of 7 recommendations remain outstanding for 2017-2018. I think as any organisation, we should be ashamed that we've got particularly 7 outstanding, of which 3 are, I think, 3 of these are important or priority. I mean, in any organisation, if we're going to have internal audits, the organisation, that the management ought to be taking a firm look at this, and it makes me uncomfortable when I read it.
Absolutely. Perhaps if I can update on that as well. Since the end of year, we have finalised a further 3 of those recommendations. So there's now 4 outstanding. I'll come on to more detail around them in the follow-up, but I do agree in terms of implementing those recommendations. Those 2017 recommendations outstanding relate to cybersecurity, and they have been the 4 remaining ones, 3 medium priority and 1 low priority, have had revised dates further to this position.
I take your point, John, and we do have the next item in which we can pick that up, because I think I'd be interested, like you, in pursuing it.
Comment on page, can I ask Fiona to comment on page 205? We've only completed, and I understand why, 2 days out of a total plan of 107 days. How do you feel about that? Do you feel confident that the auditors, as auditors, you will be able to complete those audits?
Oh, sorry, is this coming into the progress report for this year? Perhaps
yes, it is. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was planning to talk about that into the next paper. Yes, absolutely. In terms of the days, they were.
Well, I think what we'll.
I think your screen is frozen.
Yeah.
You're back.
Hello, sorry about that. I think before we go into next report, we have the recommendations are to note this report. Are members happy that we do that? And then we can pick up the progress report, which John's last question referred to the next item. Members happy? Right, I'll take that as assent. So we'll move on then to item 12. And Fiona, if you want to do an introduction and then we can pick up John's point. Is that okay?
Absolutely, yeah, thank you, Chair. In terms of the progress report for this year, we had originally the internal audit plan, which was pre-COVID. There was then a revised plan post-COVID. This was approved later in the year than what we would normally expect. So the plan has been pushed back mainly into quarters 3 and quarter 4. In terms of picking up your question, John, regarding whether we could deliver the plan, absolutely. What we have done is for the remainder of the year, we've assigned the auditors to those particular audits for the whole year. We've now scheduled in and planned all of quarter 3's audits, and quarter 4's audits we do have in mind of how that's going to be delivered. I do add the caveat that if there's a second wave that wipes everybody out or has a disastrous effect, we would be in a different position. But all things considered at the moment, we have the resources in place, and they have actually been assigned to the audits to know what they're going to be undertaking. In terms of progress already with the assurance mapping, we hope to conclude this assurance mapping fairly soon. This started as a quarter 2 audit. It has been somewhat delayed and pushing it back to finish off as a quarter 3 audit. This being because the assurance mapping we are undertaking here at our South Holland Council and our other local councils. What we are doing is working together on the assurance mapping. What we're trying to look for is to ascertain, are there any areas of risk that haven't been considered as part of the internal audit plan that need to be considered, anything new that's arising that's coming out of there, or anything that's arising coming out of committees or management that we need to consider. We're looking to get 3 outcomes or potential outcomes from the assurance mapping exercise. This would be, we've had assurances from management that no further internal audit work is required around a particular area. They have things in place to cover it, or it's an audit that can actually wait until next year. The second one would be we already have an internal audit underway, such as corporate governance or key financial controls, that we need to consider further risks as a result of COVID coming out and would be needed to be included in those audits. The third area, which I think is more prominent, is there something that we're not covering in this particular audit plan that is a key risk, whether it's an existing risk or an emerging risk, that should be considered for inclusion in the plan. At the end of this piece of work, we will produce a report, and we wouldn't recommend that you add extra audits, but we will suggest there's areas there that you need to consider for internal audit coverage. This could be things like with the business grants. Obviously, that's as a result of COVID. It's a new area, it's a significant area for all councils. What we are finding is that because it is so significant, most of the councils that we've talked to in detail have actually got this under control. They have those resources in place, and they are being managed. So it's not requiring further internal audit coverage. But we do need to consider that in more detail, because some places are asking for us to come in and give them the assurance that they would like. We are considering this across all of the councils in case there is something that would be picked up, say here or in another council, that hasn't been thought of elsewhere and should be considered. So that's why we're trying to do a wide coverage of it. In terms of the timing, this is somewhat delayed in 1 or 2 of the councils not agreeing their plans quite as quickly as others, which meant that we had to start the assurance mapping slightly later than what we would like to, or complete it later than what we'd like to for the remainder. We are at the tail end of this exercise now, so we are looking to conclude on that fairly soon and then report back to you. In terms of the rest of the plan, as I say, work is progressing. Within every single one of the audits, there will be reference to COVID. This will be one of our key considerations. How has it impacted on the audit area? What changes have been made? What is the risk profile of the area? How are controls being managed? And how is it looking for over the initial outbreak and over the longer period? So we will be considering that right throughout. Perhaps if there are any other questions on the plan.
I'm sorry, my connection isn't brilliant this morning for some reason, the screen keeps freezing. So if you can hear me, I've apologise if you lost me for that. Any further comments from members or questions to Fiona on this item? So, Kyber.
Thank you, Chairman. I think on the basis of what we've been told, whilst we have been given satisfactory evidence that the programme will be completed subject to no further major lockdown.
Yes, well, that may or may not be the case, so we'll see where that takes us. Yeah, that's to note. I'd take us now on to item 13, the follow-up report on internal audit recommendations. So, Fiona, back to you. Do you have any comment you wish to make?
Absolutely, thank you, Chair. There is one typo under 2.3, which I do apologise for. Total number of recommendations raised in 2017-18 is 77. There are actually 73 complete, not 72 at this stage. So I do apologise for that typo coming into play there. In terms of the follow-up, there has been some movement, as I say, from previously for 2017-18. There has been a further 3 recommendations implemented, the outstanding ones being around cyber security. And we are continuing to follow up on those recommendations to see what progress is being made from when the recommendation was made until now. I wasn't planning to go into a great amount of detail in terms of recommendations in terms of their movement. We've stated there with 18-19, we now have 15 recommendations outstanding. Some of those recommendations we are still waiting for an update from management, and we are continuing to seek that update from them. In terms of, we've got the progress in Appendix 1 for where we are overall with all the recommendations, and then the details of the outstanding recommendations and where we are with them going forward. We do carry out, undertake follow-up exercises every month. So we do continually look to follow up and liaise with management to keep on top of these. Perhaps if there are any questions.
I'd like to pick up John's point from earlier on, and in that I think where we have a matter that is outstanding and that has gone beyond its review date,
yeah,
I do think that I think in the past we've said we would like a senior officer to come to this committee to explain why the item is still outstanding. And I think we picked up, last year we picked up some of the ones that have been outstanding for several years. And we did have, to their credit, some officers come and explain, but it did make a dramatic difference in the amount of outstanding internal audit recommendations. So I am keen that we have a look at those which are, as John highlighted, substantially beyond their initial timescale and have been outstanding for a number of years. John, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes, please. There's a few things on this report which are inconsistent and don't do us favours. I think just taking you firstly to page 212. I heard what you said, Fiona, about the number, but it says on section 2.3, it says 4 recommendations are now outstanding, brackets 2 important and 4 need attention.
I do apologise.
That made 6. And also, if you go on to the next to page 213, it says there are on section 2.5, so there are 15 recommendations, 4 important and 16 needs attention. I mean, I think it always makes me feel uncomfortable when numbers don't add up, and to have 21% outstanding for 18-19 doesn't do us any favors either. I mean, I do think management, particularly the chief executive, ought to take a closer look. I don't think it's necessarily Tier's responsibility to get the actions resolved. It's Breckland Council. If we're going to spend all this money on internal audit, which are important, what at least we could do is when we agree the recommendations, and these have been agreed by management, is to complete them. And this is, this has been ongoing in the 3 years I've been on this committee. This has not really been resolved, this issue, and it doesn't do the council any favours. If I move on to page...
John, if I could just make a point, we don't technically have a chief executive at the moment for the council, but there is a meeting this afternoon where we're hoping, I think, to appoint an interim. I'd look at the cabinet members to agree with that. That meeting is this afternoon. Mark, you want to come in?
Just to clarify, Chairman, we're seeking to appoint an interim head of paid service, so not the full duties of the chief executive.
Okay, so we right, but I agree with everything that you've said, John, and I think that in terms of the plan, I think given the hiatus, but I would like to address this again in December, where we could perhaps have a discussion with the new senior management team that will probably arise as a result of this appointment. It is quite quick. Councillor Kybird.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 217, there's been a delay to the section 106 work because the outsourced solicitor has been furloughed. Now, question one is, can the 106 work be done by remote working? And it's really, it's up to them to deliver, or we need to bring the service back in-house, because a lot of those 106 matters, as we know, time is of the essence, and if the work isn't done, developers may gain and parishes may lose.
Does any of the officers have a comment on that?
Well, Chairman, I head up the council's legal service. If indeed we are unable to secure the services of our usual solicitor, then absolutely we need to either deal with it in-house where we've got those skills, or we need to commission the work elsewhere. What I don't know about is how far we may have progressed with a particular Section 106 agreement and how easy it would be for another solicitor to take over at any given point in time. But if somebody could just confirm for me which Section 106 agreement that is, I'll make further inquiries.
Well, I think it's a generic trying to deal with any backlog in the 106 matters, but we haven't got sufficient information in front of us as to know what work has been delayed. But we do know, I think it was Sam Tony lost out on several tens of thousands of pounds because an agreement wasn't actioned in a timely manner. So as this work has been delayed, I would suggest in the first instance, anything that is at risk of exceeding its time limitation be actioned in an urgent alternative manner.
And I agree with everything that Councillor Kybird has said, and I think that if we could pick that up, because I think that the financial implications are such that it is something that we want to address. But I am very aware, and I would just like to say this has been an exceptional year, and we have had most of the officer corps off their day jobs, doing jobs around supporting communities and working within the community to manage the issues around the COVID crisis. And as such, the capacity for the non-frontline jobs that we would do in the normal course of business as an authority, that capacity has not been available because we have had the officer corps on, as I say, protecting the residents. So I do think we are faced with a very, very unusual situation. What I don't want to do is to, because we're not out of this yet, and I think we're heading towards the second peak over the winter, I don't want to set a set of unrealistic demands on and especially as we as we speak, we do not even have a head of paid service in the council. But I do think that the issues raised are important, and I do think that we ought to agree that we come back here as a committee to look at a recovery plan and to pick up some of the historical issues that Fiona and her team have picked up. But I don't want us to lose sight that we have, as members, taken decisions to reallocate the roles of the vast majority of the officers in the council to deal with the COVID crisis. So I think that we need to recognise that. But that doesn't mean that any of the points raised aren't important and material. But I do think on the issue of the 106 money, because that actually has a fallout, a financial fallout and affects specific areas, I do think that ought to be picked up as a matter of urgency, if it hasn't been so already. Councillor Cambridge, you've got your arm up.
Perhaps we can receive an update on that prior to the next meeting when the facts are clearer.
Just to say, Chairman, if you saw me typing while you were talking, I was just sending an email to the head of legal services to ask her to look into it so that I can provide an update as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Councillor Burt, I had your hand.
I did. It was just a quick comment because I.
Is it just me? I can't hear Councillor Burt. The screen is frozen. Okay, well, while we wait for that to resolve it, are there any other comments from members?
Sorry. Could I add, sorry, I just wanted to address, John, with the difference in the numbers and the wording. I do apologise, this is my error. I'd updated the numbers on my last update of the report before I submitted it. I hadn't updated the wording side of it. I do apologise for that. Most of the committee reports I do, I just do the numbers and not the words. I didn't even pick up on it, so I do apologise, that is my error.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Sorry, Chairman. I just wanted to clarify, particularly for John. I think you said we didn't have a head of paid service in post. We do still have one at the moment. Although the chief executive has resigned, she is carrying on as head of paid service until we appoint a new one. So, because in law, we cannot have a gap. So I just wanted to clarify that for you. Thank you, Chairman.
Sorry, that's my my inference, and thank you for correcting me, Councillor Turner. I accept that you are correct. Okay, I haven't any further indications from anybody in the meeting who wishes to speak. So I think we have to, I'm just checking our recommendations, we have to agree the contents of the report, subject to John's correct identification of the differences in the numbers and Fiona's acknowledgement that the final numbers are the ones that are correct. Are people happy to agree the contents of the report? Lovely, thank you. So we now move on to item 14, training, which is a standing item. I don't have anything I wish to raise. Does any members, and Julie, is there anything that has, no?
No, Chairman, not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Members, any comments? No? Okay. Well, we move on to item 15, the work programme on page 218 of your agendas. Now, we have agreed that we'd like to see the risk report in December. So if we could add that. Is there anything else that members wish to address? And I think we will have, we've got a report, progress on the internal audit activity already on the work programme. So I think that will pick up some of the comments from today. That's already in there. Anything else that members want to add or delete? Okay. So the date of the next meeting is Thursday, the 17th of December. So bring your party hats, very close to Christmas. And I look forward to seeing you all then. In the meantime, I would like to thank the Cabinet members for attending. It is very good to see you, and we do appreciate you taking the time to come to Governance and Audit. Thank you for that. I would like to thank the other members who are not members of the committee for their attention. We always welcome attention from other members. And I would like to thank the officers and our partners, Fiona and Mark, very much indeed for everything that they for being here today. So thank you all very much indeed. Goodbye.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Goodbye.